Alrighty. Okay. So hello everyone. Hey India. Hello. It's lovely. It's really lovely to have so many people here. I know you're going to love this. And I think what you will get out of it. You may already have this. Some of you already know this stuff. But what you get out of it is you will be able to be cleverer without actually having to increase your IQ. Is really what it is. The category of problems which we think of as kind of like bottlenecks in our brain that kind of paralyze us and cause us to make compromises. And this is just a nice, simple technique of really solving those. You could view it from a couple of different angles, and one of them is that it's problem solving. The other one is that it's solution making. So it's a clever way of coming up with solutions just by thinking ever so slightly differently. Now, I just need to get rid of something here so I can see what I'm talking about. Now, let me just tell you about us. That's me. I'm the good-looking one. All right, there we go. Good. That's Graham. So Graham teaches this stuff professionally. He is a professional teacher of the theory constraints thinking processes. So this is really cool. He's the master. I'm kind of largely self-taught over the years, and I've sort of developed my own way of doing it. Graham actually teaches people properly how to do the deep version of this, which is really cool. Carl, he teaches how to do that. He coaches more, I think. That'd be fair, a better word for it? Yeah. Carl coaches people and works with groups and uses particularly this technique and some of the others in Ellie Goldratt's toolkit, his thinking toolkit, and helps people to tackle the bottlenecks that are in their brain. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go for a couple.
Oh, personal development, Clarke. Personal development and workplace performance. Hey, but I just want to give a big shout out to Anil because it's 2 a.m. in the morning in India and he showed up. So I just wanted to say hi. I remember you attended one of our previous workshops. By the way, these workshops are recorded and we will make them accessible to people. So if you're not like Anil and you can't do it 2 o'clock in the morning, chocolate fish for Anil, says James. I love it. If you can't do it, you can always come back to the recordings. And we've already done a couple. We've got this one, and I think Clark's going to talk about what we're going to do next as well. There are a couple more coming up. But anyway, I just thought I'd slip in there, Clarke.
That's really cool.
Back to you.
Cool. Okay. So what we found, and the reason we decided to do these, is that there's this nasty little virus that came around and stopped us traveling. It killed off quite a bit of our work because the world just went quiet a few months ago. You might have noticed. So Graham, Carl, and I decided that because we were in the same time zone here down in New Zealand, that we would get together every week and just have a natter, just have a talk about things. And what we discovered is that this CorkScrew thinking, which is Ellie Goldratt's tool, the Evaporating Cloud, plus a bit of thought that goes around it that's a bit different from his. What we discovered was that we'd taken what we learned from Ellie Goldratt, from the courses that we went on, from the mentoring that we got, from the books we read, and we all kind of developed our own way of using them. And what was really interesting was that we effectively all gone through the same simplification process. And we were all kind of using them in a different way, which was a lot less daunting than the way we had learned it in the early days. So maybe that just comes from mastery over time. But what we found is that we've got a nice little approach here, and we really want to share this because this is like, to my mind, this is Ellie Goldratt's. It's like a song he had on his album, his worst album that was actually his best song, and no one heard it. So we want to share the magic. So that's where we come from. We are theory constraints people. We love this stuff, but this is just a simplified, perhaps hopefully a bit more accessible version of that. So we're going to come at it from different angles. I'm going to kind of give you the big picture, and I'm going to show you that it's not just Ellie Goldratt that does this, and it's not just us. This is actually a thinking process that all great thinkers and leaders use. And what we learn from Ellie Goldratt is just a nice way of simplifying that and making it more systematic. Then Graham next week is going to go in and add a bit more detail, fill out some of the gaps. So you'll get kind of like the big picture from me. Graham will give you a bit more of the hands-on nitty-gritty stuff and more examples. And then in the third session, Carl is going to take us into the most interesting place in the entire world, which is the inside of your head, right? They're going to go inside your head and then just take and use this tool and CorkScrew Bob, this fellow here. He is a fellow, don't ask me how I know. CorkScrew Bob here. We're going to take CorkScrew Bob and we're just going to, Carl's going to talk about how to get inside your head and use this. So it should be a nice layered approach. We're not going to teach you the rocket science version of this. We're going to teach you the Volkswagen Beetle version of this, the stuff that you use every day. And hopefully you'll find it as fascinating as useful and as useful as we do. So now, while you're watching this, I hope the internet is good enough. But look at this. This took me 10 minutes to do because I got some software that did it. But the bottleneck, guys, that's us. We proudly present CorkScrew solutions. So this is like problem solving with a twist. It was corkscrew thinking until yesterday, until I discovered someone had trademarked that. So if anyone knows how trademarks work and whether I can still use that expression, would be contact me. So CorkScrew solutions with Bob. Notice that Bob is capital B and capital B. Bob actually stands for something, and we will get to that shortly. So this is us, this is me, and I won't bore you with the boring details of me, but these are the books I wrote. If you're really keen and you would really like a freebie copy, I'm pointing to it here, I was supposed to draw on the screen, of the bottleneck rules, go to share, share.toc.guide, and you can get a freebie copy of that. So that's kind of like advanced theory constraints, the logistical stuff, but for beginners, is how I think of it. Rolling Rocks Downhill is Agile plus TOC. That's the business novel, the book I'm most proud of. And the last one here is just the transcript of a conversation I had with Ellie Goldratt. And if you're advanced TOC and you haven't read that, just go to my website and just read the free version of it. I put it out as a book because it's nice to have a book. But there's just so much wisdom in there, and it all comes from him. And I just effectively say aha and not a lot. And then
I have to give that interview a plug too. By the way, Clarke, that is an awesome interview. That was an impressive piece of work. And I mean, your book is gold as well.
Thank you.
Just say I'm a little bit biased. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but certainly that interview, I've been back to that interview a number of times, and there are some real gold nuggets in there.
Yeah.
Awesome,
I absolutely
awesome work.
think it's one of those things. If you've got TOC in your head, and then you want to take it further, it was his. I think it was Ellie's almost his last effectively published content, and it was just. I was lucky to be there in person, but listening to it or reading it's fantastic. And then there's this book here, CorkScrew Solutions, Problem Solving with a Twist. It will be available on February 1st. If you're really keen, you can pop over and pre-order it on Amazon. Don't read the sales blurb because it's rubbish at the moment, but it's out there. And the reason it's out there on February 1st is that's my wife's birthday. And I thought I'm going to be getting big trouble if I'm publishing a book on my wife's birthday. So it's given me the momentum. I have 78 days to go to complete it. Right.
Roughly.
Not that I'm counting. So see that little fella here? That one there becomes that one. That there, I think he has a name, CorkScrew Bob. He is our guide in this. He's not the hero of our story in the book, and in this, he's our guide. I'm not going to go on and on about him, but it's really important because we're just going to use him as a structure to capture problems or dilemmas, situations where you have to make a choice, and this happens all day, every day, but the choices aren't easy. So CorkScrew Bob is going to help us tackle these. And I'll tell you a little bit about his story as we go along. But just want to just emphasize this, right? So if this line here is your IQ, this one here is your life before learning corkscrew thinking. I think it adds to your cleverness without actually adding to your IQ. It's just a different way of thinking about solving problems, and it makes you cleverer. This is the thing that we've all found, that Graham, Carl and I, when we catch up, we just constantly go, man, we talk to these people, and what they say to us is, wow, you know, we figured out how to solve this problem. It's had us stuck for ages. We didn't know how to solve it. And then you helped us. You're so clever. And yet often we haven't actually told them what to do. Very rarely do we actually even give hints at what to do. We just use this process and a few others. And the process helps them be cleverer. And so we're just helping people think in a different way. And that's what we're going to cover today. Corkscrew Bob is our guide, remember? But we have kind of three heroes in this story. Whoa. The first one is Winston Churchill. He came up with the name corkscrew thinking. And he uses this, and I'm going to teach I'm going to show you how to do corkscrew thinking with an example from Winston Churchill, where he helped Britain win World War I by using this thinking process. And so it's an example. Go through this and you'll get the gist of it, and then Graham and Carl will fill out some of the gaps later on in the coming weeks. So he is our first hero. Roger L. Martin, you may not have heard of him, but I'm going to talk about him because he went off not really knowing about our real hero here, Ellie Goldratt. He went off and he studied a whole bunch of people, great leaders, and this guy is on some management website voted him the #1 management thinker in the world. He went off and he studied these people, great leaders. He's written books with very, very impressive CEOs and stuff like that. And he discovered that there was one thing that they did differently to all of the mediocre leaders and to basically everyone else. And it was this thinking style. So we'll come back to that. He calls this integrative thinking. Now, Ellie Goldratt, our hero, there he is. That's when he and I were talking. I love that picture. He was one of these great thinkers. So he thought, and he did this stuff. And then many, many years ago, when he kind of come up with all the bottleneck stuff, and he stopped selling software and went off to start a consulting business, he looked and he realized that he was thinking differently to other people. And he did something that other people didn't do. He actually sat down and said, how do I think differently when I'm solving problems? What do I do? So he sat down and effectively come up with instructions with a whole lot of help for other people, and invented a bunch of tools that harnessed the way that he thought instinctively so that other people could do it. And that tool that we're discussing today is called the Evaporating Cloud, or the cloud. So these are our three heroes. This one here, he's our guide. Let's talk about Winston. Right, so he's hero #1. Now, can I take you back to 1911, right? 1911. Agadir over there. I've been there. I went on a sun holiday once about 20-something years ago. Agadir there. In 1911, there was all of this colonialism stuff going on, and the European countries were busy slicing up the rest of the world. And the Spanish apparently moved some troops into Morocco. That annoyed Germany, so they sent a gunboat into Agadir Harbour, and this sort of pretty much kicked off World War I, except it didn't. People thought that World War I was about to start. Because of this, everyone in Europe was getting really, really angry with each other. And Winston Churchill and the British Prime Minister, just about everyone else, thought, war is inevitable. So Winston, who was still a guy in his 30s at this stage, he got made First Lord of the Admiralty, So he was in charge of the Navy, and he got given a mission. And his mission there was to win a war against Germany. Now, what I want you to notice here is that I am here filling out a diagram that's this diagram that Ellie Goldratt came up with, the cloud. It looks a little bit different to how he does it, but this is a cloud, and I'm just describing the situation, the big gnarly problem that Winston had to solve using the cloud. So let me get rid of that there. And this would be the shape that that you'll use either in your head or on paper when you use this stuff here. So top box, his mission. So what was he trying to do? And he was told, go off and prepare Britain to win a war, which will muchly be fought on the oceans, win a war against Germany. So that was kind of like, here it is, that's your mission. Right, so that's what we pop in this little top box here. And there's Bob there, just so you notice him. And Winston found himself in the middle of a dilemma. Okay, so Winston's thinking, go to war, prepare ourselves to war. The German Navy is busy building lots of ships. You need to build lots of ships. Oh, and by the way, we've noticed that the cruise liners, they're converting in Germany to run on oil. And they're much faster and more powerful. And we think the Navy over there is going to do that. So you need to, on the one hand, his choice was, we need you to convert the Navy to oil. But he goes, okay, great idea. We need to convert to oil. Convert to oil. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, why would you convert to oil? Because then you have far more powerful warships. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. We know this to be true now, but back in 1911, this was new technology. This was like installing the beta version of Big Sur on your MacBook Pro the day before you do a webinar. So it's quite scary, but they thought it would work. They had proof it would work. So they go, okay, we're going to go for oil. Really good idea. So you can imagine the engineers getting really excited about this. Hey, yeah, great. You can imagine Winston in Whitehall offices there, smoking cigars and drinking brandy and going, yes, oil's great. Oil's great. But he didn't just do it, because he had others there coming to him. Probably you can imagine these dark men's clubs where he's drinking brandy and smoking cigars. And he's being visited by Welsh coal miners saying, no, you must stick with coal. You must stick with coal because why would you stick with coal when it's clearly not as good as oil? Well, the reason why you might do that is that the oil, which is going to power these guys here, comes from here. And there's an awful long way between there and there, but the coal comes from Wales. So, effectively, the reason why you'd want to stick with coal is that you would have a reliable fuel supply. Okay, so that makes sense, right? And you can imagine people arguing there with him. But Winston, there's no point in having powerful ships if they're out at sea and they've got no fuel. They're not going to be very powerful then, are they, chaps? No, so, but you can imagine the other side. Yeah, but if we go to sea and we go to war and we've got these coal-powered ships, we're going to lose the war. So this is what's known as a dilemma, right? You've got two choices, and in this case, both have the interesting feature that they sound both really good and really bad at the same time. So now you'll see, on the one hand, you've got convert to oil. On the other hand, stick to coal. So now I want you to notice this. They seem like they are opposites. You can't do both. Okay, so this is the problem that he is faced with. And what we've done here is effectively we've taken these two choices and we've tried to figure out what do you get out of each of them. So that's what he's done. Now, let's just wander along a little bit, because what he really wants out of this is he wants to have powerful warships and a reliable fuel supply. He wants both of those. That's it. He wants both of those. So he looks at these options And over quite a long time, he decides that he'll convert to oil. But the way to get both of those options is to buy 51% of the Persian oil company, because it turns out that their real concern wasn't the distance so much that the oil had to go. It's just that while the oil fields and the oil companies were owned by others, they didn't have control over who they sold to. So that's what made it flaky. So he went off, he bought that there now is known as BP, British Petroleum, and it set them up to win eventually World War I. So let me just play that back. Two options. He looked up here, found what he really wanted, and he invented a new option that helped him get that. That's effectively the process, right? And he called this, well, he didn't exactly call this, he called a bunch of things corkscrew thinking. And I'm going to, by the way, in a little bit, I'll break down this and I'll explain more step by step what he did and how to use this. But this is what he said about corkscrew thinking. This is from an article in the Guardian. He said that the world, during the Second World War, Winston, when he was Prime Minister, declared a need for corkscrew thinkers, people with the ability to break away from the traditional linear way of thinking. So you think of corkscrew, it is problem solving with a twist. You know, you don't come at it directly, you come at it sideways. A corkscrew in reality unblocks a wine bottle, gets things flowing, but it doesn't do it using brute strength. It does it using two types of leverage built into the corkscrew, and that's very clever. And Winston, who loved a good metaphor, described that he needed corkscrew thinkers. And these are people that just came at things sideways and thought differently to everyone else. And I love this because he said, without these individuals, Churchill believed that neither side would win the war because everyone was thinking in the same way. So in other words, the enemy's next move would almost always be predictable. So this is what he did. He wanted people who thought differently, come up with different solutions, because that gave you a huge advantage because no one else would be predicting it. So that's the essence of corkscrew thinking. Go for it.
I really love this, Clarke. I really, this is a great example because you can imagine if you could have an organization full of people thinking differently and being innovative. Yeah, I just think it's such an awesome example.
Problem is when everyone's thinking the same way, your competitors in business, not just wartime, but you're all building the same products, you all have the same service. No one's got that sustainable competitive advantage that allows you to charge a little bit extra and make good profits.
Or surprise.
Roman's got a really good point here, Clarke. Classical management decision today would be, let's build hybrids.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, that is one possible solution, provided that you get the best of both worlds out of it. The key thing is that if you look at this, we want to make sure that these things become clear. Because what we normally do is we normally have, you can imagine this happening both inside Churchill's brain and in his meetings. He's getting arguments from one side saying, do this, do this, do this. And then you get other ones going, no, do this, do this, do this. And he has to come up with some solution that gets the best of both worlds out of it. And a hybrid might well be that. Buying an oil company that went on to basically fund Britain's prosperity for the next 30 years might also be another way of doing it. Yeah. So it's the process. And yeah, he did. The stuff he did was actually had very good financial consequences for Britain as well. For a long time.
The idea that it was behind BP, that's pretty awesome. Alan, he's just saying, am I the only one who has lost Clarke? If anybody else is having trouble seeing, just drop us a message in the chat Clarke, just keep moving along.
Cool, yeah. Robert, I will have a look at that. Thank you. Cool. Right, okay, so that's Winston, right? He wants people who think a bit differently. This little corkscrew thing. So this is all this is. It's just a little simple way of solving problems without arguing for one side or arguing for the other, or coming up with some stupid compromise or getting paralyzed in arguments, right? It's a way of lifting it up a level, looking at what you're trying to get out of it, and then trying to get the best of both worlds. Right, so let me introduce you now to this lovely looking fella. His name is Roger L. Martin. He's a professor, at least he was. He was the former dean and director at the Martin Prosperity Institute at Rotman School of Management in Toronto, in Canada. So he's one of the world's big management thinkers. He's kind of like Druckerish kind of level. He's written a bunch of books. This one here, I love this. When I saw the title of this, I thought I knew. This came out maybe 15 years ago. The Opposable Mind. The Opposable Mind. It was comparing like using the metaphor of the opposable thumb, which made humans be able to do all sorts of things. And he was saying that this thinking technique he discovered out there in the wild was like the equivalent of the opposable thumb. So what he did, he went off and he studied in the wild, kind of like David Attenborough, sitting out there amongst the gorillas. Roger Martin went off and he studied great leaders. And these weren't just good leaders. These were the creme de la creme. And he studied them, he looked at what they did, and he noticed that they all thought differently. Okay, so this is how he wrote it. But now keep in mind, he's an academic who teaches very, very expensive executive MBA courses, and he teaches what we're showing you here, his version of it, in those courses. But what he noticed, and I'll read it out here and then I'll unpack it. He noticed that all of these truly great leaders shared these things, that they had the predisposition and the capability to hold two diametrically opposing ideas in their heads. Okay, so start with that. I've got two diametrically opposing ideas. I've got two ideas and they're exact opposites, right? Build warships made out of coal. Build warships made out of oil. Run on oil, sorry. Made out of coal would be interesting. And then, without panicking, which is kind of helpful, or just simply settling, which, basically coming up with a compromise, or without panicking or simply settling for one of these two alternatives, they produce this is going to be a struggle for me, synthesis that is superior to either opposing ideas. Okay, so this is the idea. You start with two opposing ideas, and then you come up with a better idea. And this is the process that you're going to learn here, right? Now, he used big words for it, and when he's talking to CEOs, this stuff, I guess, is really important. But for everyday people, just that little diagram that I've been filling out, just thinking that way and following the steps I showed, just really easy. Now, what he said, and this is a direct quote, is that the mastery of integrative thinking, which is what he called this approach, is the one thing. Not one or several things, but the one thing that sets highly successful leaders apart from the masses. So if he's saying that, if you're not a successful leader, you're probably not doing this, maybe add this in and you'll be able to solve all sorts of problems that other people can't. And come up with, it's not just problem solving, come up with clever solutions that maybe other people can't. Okay, so just this is really, really, this is handy for us because it's an endorsement of, hey, look, you've seen Churchill, great leader, he thought like this. You've seen the guy who does studies and he's going, hey, all great leaders think like this. It's the one thing that is their competitive advantage. So what we're doing here is trying to show you an easy everyday way of doing this, which brings us to our real hero in this story, though he would have liked to call himself as the guide, Ellie Goldratt. So Ellie, I'm sure most of them know, but he's the father of theory of constraints. He passed away about 10 years ago, and you probably almost certainly heard of The Goal, which was his book about primarily bottleneck management, but also about finance and a whole bunch of sales, marketing. Brilliant book, a bit dated now, but still absolutely brilliant book. After he did that, that was like his first big hit, if we switch to a musical metaphor. Then he went off, and his second album, which I actually think was his best album, is It's Not Luck. On the sales ranking, The Goal is way up here amongst business books. You know, it's one of the great books of all time, and it just keeps selling and selling and selling. It's Not Luck is way down here. It's the second album. But I think in that, it contains the most magical bits. And if you look in there, it's got a whole lot of really just amazing stuff. I think it's so much better than The Goal. But anyway, I'm going on about it. I love that book. It was not clear. But hidden inside it is this tool called the Evaporating Cloud. This is what Ellie called it. Now, what he did is he went off, like I said earlier, he went off and he looked and go, I think differently. I need something to sell. I'm running a consulting business. What's my IP? What can I package up and sell now that my bottleneck management software business has kind of faded away? What can I do? What can I do? So he sat down and he came up with all of these bunch of tools, and he gave it to his colleagues. And my mentor, Jim Bowles, was one of them. And they went through and they took Ellie's thinking and his notes and they converted into much more accessible bunch of tools with actually, how-to instructions. So I think hidden in this book is this gem of an idea called the Evaporating Cloud. Now, if you're familiar with Goldratt stuff, you'll know it kind of looks like that. Hang on, that is there. Hang on, there, that it looks just like that. And I don't know why. Actually, I do know why. I'll tell you why. I always draw it like that. I just rotate it 90 degrees. It just feels much more natural. And then I have it kind of, I don't have the words rotated, and I just fill it out like this. Notice in the middle there, here's Bob. Now, the reason I first drew this like this is I was driving along with a friend, and we were talking about some stuff, and he was having troubles at work. And I said, look, you know the cloud things, right? Why don't we talk about them? And he goes, okay, right, why don't we stop at a pub and we'll draw one on the back of a napkin? And I had a funny feeling that he more wanted to stop at a pub than to do a cloud. So we kept driving. We're driving through Fife in Scotland. I remember it quite well. And I said, hey, look, and I was busy trying to think of a way. How can you capture these 5 boxes while you're actually out there driving? Because none of us could, our hands were busy and we didn't have any paper. So I don't know, just off the top of my head, I just said, well, okay, well, just think, you got the 2 boxes, the 2 choices. Just think of them as sitting on your hands. This is kind of like mnemonic, all right? Okay, so they're sitting on your hands. So there's, on the one hand, you could build coal-powered ships. On the other hand, you could build oil-powered ships. Okay, so you've got 2 hands. On the one hand, on the other hand. Okay, cool. And notice Bob here, he has 2 hands sort of sitting down there, right? Okay, cool. Okay, so we talked through his 2 options. We come up with those things. Okay, so that was easy. All right. Then I sort of said, well, you know how, remember Atlas, that picture, the guy he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, right? So he's got, just imagine on each of your shoulders, you've got some weighty thing that's really important for you and you want to do it. Okay, so what would you get, Graham is his name, what would you get, Graham, out of building coal-powered ships? And you go, oh, coal-powered ship, well, safe, yeah, safe fuel supply. That's a big weighty thing, and that's what you need. Okay, right, so that's the shoulder. The other shoulder, powerful ships, right? Okay, so we talked through this, and what we realized that this was actually a really handy way of, if you can't write the thing down, of just placing these thoughts on the two hands and the two shoulders. And thus was born Bob, and that shape. And I started drawing these diagrams in that shape ever since. And they're otherwise they're identical, apart from Ellie's one didn't have Bob. So
just before you keep moving, so just a question from Viju. Viju, the question is, can you have more than two requirements? If I could pick that up in terms of an answer, that's probably going to be a more complex problem. You may end up having to use multiple clouds, multiple evaporating clouds sometimes. So yes, it's possible, but you might find that you actually have to dig a little bit deeper and get to a core. There's a couple of other questions. As your bowler, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. When we talk about it from an organizational perspective and having a whole bunch of corkscrew thinkers in an organization, there are a number of things. In fact, we talked about this last week, didn't we, Clarke, in another webinar? There are a whole lot of factors around trying to build this into organizations. What we're focused on today is just this particular thinking process. And to Bill's comment, there are actually a couple of other books that haven't been mentioned. I had a quick look at the wiki that you provided. There's a couple of other books. We might touch on those a little bit later, but just wanted to acknowledge you guys are there. And if there are chats and stuff that you want to add in, and there are questions you want to ask, we're here. That's actually what Graham and I are doing, sitting in the back, just to try and give as much value as possible to you through this webinar. So thanks, Clarke, for the little interlude, and we'll keep running through. Back to you, Clarke.
Cool. I'll come back, Michael. I just saw your question. Do you have to know the value of the top box, the objective, first? I'll come back to that. I actually covered that very shortly, I think. So now, I just want to show you here why we got a corkscrew. So this is just one of those weird things, and it happened about maybe 6 weeks ago. I was looking for corkscrews because I like the idea of calling this corkscrew thinking. And then I got this picture from some website, and I looked at it and I put it on a slide like this, and I realized that it was Bob. It's the same shape. So suddenly corkscrew Bob was born. Right now, I'm going to give away the secret here. The bit I mentioned is that Bob, I mentioned this best of both worlds, B-O-B, Bob, B-O-B, best of Bob, best of both. And this is what we're trying to do. That's why he's called Corkscrew Bob, is because we want to use him as a guide for corkscrew thinking, as a way of holding the diagram in his hands, putting the weights on his shoulders, getting the mission sitting above his head. So it's a nice handy device for just not having to hold all this stuff in our head, just get it out on paper, or pop it on our body here to remember it, so that we don't have to rely on massive working memory up in our heads. But the ethos that comes from him is that the easiest way to solve problems is to look at the hands, find the shoulders, and then go, how can I get the best of both? That's there's more than that after it, but that's what we're learning today, and this will take you such a long way. So here's the process, right? To answer Michael's question, there you go. This is how we do it. So the process, step one, define your mission. So like Churchill, it was clear, set yourself up to win a coming war. Sometimes though, you can't actually put words around your mission. So I don't worry about that. If I can't, I don't. If I need to, I'll leave it, maybe have a scratchy thought in my head, just draft something down or even leave it blank, and then I'll come back to it later. But the mission is often something like have a successful business, or have a great life, or win the war, or like in the CorkScrew Solutions book, I use my dog. She has a dilemma when we go out and to the beach, and her mission is to be a good dog. So start with the mission. Just help it to frame what you're trying to do. If you're in a debate an argument, conflict between different people, and you'll think of Getting to Yes, the negotiation book, fantastic book. Carl really uses all that stuff all the time. You'll think of defining a mutual objective. So your mission might be the mutual objective that you have there. Cool. Yep. So that's where you start. It's useful, but don't worry if you can't get it right to start with. Right, now you take the two conflicting options, and now you know the language you use, right? Well, on the one hand, I could invade Poland. On the other hand, I could invade Russia. You've got two options, and you just list them out. On the one hand, I could join the webinar live and maybe get a chance to ask some questions, or I could watch a recording. Really common. On the one hand, I could buy a new Mac that they just announced yesterday. Or on the other hand, I could just not buy a new Mac and not get branded by my wife. So there's a conflicts here. Just look at that and you just think about on the one hand, on the other hand. Or you might use the language, I'm torn between doing this and this. On the one hand, I could do this. On the one hand, I'd do that. So what you'll notice is that you will get stuck. You'll get stuck thinking about a problem over and over and over again. It will pinball around in your head, bouncing off the walls of your skull as you think about all of the things that go around it. And then you think, oh, look, I have a dilemma. Otherwise, I would have solved this already. Yeah, you'll be in a bind. Yep. And you kind of like frozen, you almost get paralyzed. So you take these two options, on the one hand, on the other hand. And then you just go, well, okay, I need to identify what I get out of each of these. And often instinctively, we'll go to the concrete options on our hands. And we sometimes find it quite difficult to figure out the weights on our shoulders around it. So you ask what you get out of this for each of them. What do I get out of converting to coal? Oh, it's more powerful ships. And there's more technique behind it for tricky problems where you can't do this naturally, where you struggle, or maybe it's someone else's shoulders. It's the weight on someone else's shoulders, and you can guess what their motivations might be, but you don't know. And then you think up new options that don't conflict. Okay, now, notice this. You start with two conflicting options, and they may actually be diametrically opposite, or they might be two extremes of the continuum, and you're torn between focusing on one or the other. But you're starting, I'm not sure, this or this. You start with two options, but you don't actually use the word options. You think of two solutions. I have to make a choice between this solution and this one. Think of them as options, and then you put them through the process here, and what you end up with is two conflicting options. So we solve problems by creating new options. So it's an option-making process, and that's kind of like the magic. Now, I call this bit here up thinking, and this bit thinking up. Okay, so this bit, we up think, we go that way, and then we think up new options. You don't have to remember that, but I like the play on words. So let's have a look at this just really quickly. How do we think up options that do not conflict? Now, let's just remember, this is the accessible 80/20 version that you'll use every day, and you'll find a problem tomorrow at work or later today, and you sit down and you think, oh, what would Bob do? What would Bob do? How do I do this? You'll think about, you just run through these options. This is not the advanced version where you go through and you hunt down assumptions and use them. This is the everyday version that you can use every day. Now, think up new options that do not conflict. So let's have a little bit more of a look at that. You could ask, why can't I do both? In fact, Churchill did this in this example. He didn't convert all of his ships to run on oil. He only converted his warships. So, okay, so he changed the option. We'll convert to oil, convert warships to oil, and stick with coal on the other ships. So that's one really great way of doing it. Another one is we do one now, one later. So, for instance, this is how we often instinctively solve problems. We just prioritize and go, oh, well, let's do that one first, and we'll do that one later. Yeah. So there's I don't want to spell out too much on this because it's just really easy just to brain dump things. This one here, sorry. And then we ask, what's stopping doing the right-hand option, but getting both benefits? So in other words, in this example, what's stopping us having powerful coal-powered ships? Is there a way we could do that? And then what we do is we've lifted up to this level. We're saying we're going to stick with coal. Is there a way that we can stick with coal and have powerful ships? So what we've effectively done is, rather than arguing about the two options, we're just saying, this is a framing around our problem. We need a solution where we stick with coal and also have powerful warships. Or you can go the other way, especially if you have a preferred solution. You could stick with the left-hand side. How could we convert to oil and get both of those weighty needs sorted out? Get both benefits, which is, of course, is what Churchill did. And then there's this advanced assumption hunting, which I think adds an extra 20 IQ points, but I'm not going to go into here, because the essence of this is that CorkScrew Bob wants you to look at the best of both worlds, B-O-B, best of both worlds. And if you take this process, two conflicting options, look at what you get out of each of them, so that up thinking, okay, I've got these, and then solve for trying to get both of those. That will take you just so far. Now, Graham is going to talk about this in a minute when we talk about what we do next week. But this bit here, I have found that this process, I hardly ever go to the assumption hunting bit unless I have a really tricky problem. Okay, unless I get really tricky. Normally, just doing this allows me to come up with better stuff. And even better, working with other people and getting them to fill out this and just guiding them, just realizing what those two weights on their shoulders are. And you go, oh, okay, well, I hadn't really thought about that. That's now explicit. Before it was kind of stuck in the head. That allows you to come up with really clever solutions. But if you want really, really, really clever solutions, especially ones that give you a competitive advantage, I'll let Graham talk about that in a minute. Right.
But before Graham does that, so I just want to add a couple of things there, especially because it's coming from the chat.
Yep.
Jim Price, he asked, did the coal industry, British Petroleum, purchase 51% of Persian coal, thereby giving the coal industry an interest in the outcome? Now, you heard Clarke talk about getting to yes. Now, getting to yes is actually about interest-based problem solving. And there is actually a really nice connection between interest-based problem solving and the conflict cloud. And Mahesh Gupta, I think is, I hope I pronounced his name right. He's a professor in the USA and has written a paper in the Journal of Conflict Management about the connection between this process and interest-based problem solving. So really powerful from an organizational context. There's a couple of other books. One, Isn't It Obvious? And in fact, the interview that Clarke did, Goldratt talks about Isn't It Obvious? That's about how to use these tools inside an organization. There's more to it than just teaching people how to do it. There's actually a little bit more that goes with it. So that answers Jim's question. Vincent, you talk about in psychology, they call that a bind. Absolutely. If you think about human beings as being a system of rules, policies, beliefs, and values, then you can totally use this method to help you get out of a bind personally. And that's actually what I specialize in. And I'm going to talk about that in the third session of this series of webinars. Difference between a dilemma and a decision. We can get quite deep on that. For this purpose, that's actually we just want to show you something that helps you to kind of, something you can use every day. And I love the analogy of what are the needs on your shoulders? What are the responsibilities? What's the outcome? And what are the wants or how can I get the best of both worlds? Michael says, thanks. This has been a very helpful explanation. Seems far more real world and applicable than it has been before. That's awesome. Clarke, great job. Great job. So now we're going to hand over to Graham. Sorry, I just needed to slip that in there on behalf of the people in the chat.
Before we get to Graham, I want to just finish here with one little bit that I think will tie into Graham.
Cool.
Is in the interview I did with Ellie Goldratt, he pulled out this thing, which if you were to sum it up, we all know this, don't waste an emergency. But what he said was, how do you invent? He said, how do you invent solutions, right? And he said, people are inventing solutions all the time when they have problems, and especially when they have an emergency. And he said, people always invent clever solutions in response to emergencies, always. And you'll notice this yourself. You seem like in a physical emergency, you often feel like you have superhuman strength, but in other ones, you often have this superhuman, you come up with clever solutions. Never waste a good crisis. Yeah, that's really good. So people always come up with clever solutions in response to emergency, always. And whenever we react to an emergency, we instinctively deviate from the standard rules, always, right? And in fact, in emergencies, you follow a different set of rules, and they're better rules for the emergency. But the question was, after the emergency is over, we tend to revert back to our old ways, right? But what are the new rules with better rules always? So he was saying that one way to think about coming up with brilliant ideas is to imagine you've got an emergency, or actually have one, and then figure out what you would do with that, and then adapt your insights from that. Now, I just want to really quickly here just show something here. Look at that.
The irony of that, Clarke, is that we all had an emergency, and that's what brought the three of us together.
It is indeed. Yeah. In fact, it brought all of us together, because we wouldn't be doing this if we hadn't had that. So let me just do this, right? So over here, this is where Ellie's talking about. So let me just add the two more bits here. This is animated, by the way, that one and that one. So imagine you've got this matrix, and he's saying that in an emergency, which is this side of the line over here, you come up with solutions, really clever solutions, very quickly. And often you tackle really difficult problems up here just really quickly, and the emergency gives you the impetus and then the burning platform that means that you need to just jump and do it, right? But what I would like you all to have a think about is that every day you don't have emergencies, but you have these difficult problems here, up here. I'm going to draw 3 levels here. 3 levels of problems. You've got, we're non-urgent, but we've got thoughts racing through my head. If you get easy stuff down here, in non-urgent things, just make a decision, get on with it. You know, you just get on with it. In the middle here, you've got other ones, and they tend to get you stuck. They get you, you're kind of in this bind, and you might, you've got to make a choice, or maybe you're actually conflicted between things really intensely, and they circle around in your brain, but you don't actually tend to tackle them until you kind of get into an emergency situation. It just seems to be, at least that's a pattern for me. Then you've got these other ones in the red zone up here, where you've got really tricky stuff. And these ones here, they can be crippling psychologically for you and the people around you, because you get in a bind and you don't solve them, and you carry these conflicts, these clouds around inside you that almost effectively just to take over your body. So what I've started doing since I started writing this book a year ago is whenever I notice I get a decision, I sit down and write one of these, and I force myself to do it, or I make a to-do and say, hey, look, I should be making a decision here, but I keep thinking about it. What's going on? And then I note that down and I draw out this diagram. And what I've noticed is the same patterns happen over and over and over again. So now I just want to point that out. This one here is where you use the stuff I've talked about today. Just drawing out the cloud, using that process will help you overcome these ones. If you want to go further, this is where it gets difficult and can actually be, it's much harder work. So I'm just going to now hand over to Graham just for a bit to wrap up and talk about, because we're going to join up next week, and he's going to take things further. And remember, Graham's an expert on all of this stuff, and teaches it. I'm much more self-taught, and my goal is kind of to get people, just using the 80-20. Graham knows the nitty-gritty much better than I. Graham.
Right, thanks, Clarke. 10:30 just ticked over.
You better make it quick.
I will. Really interested in the way Clarke's described on the previous slide, that green, yellow, and red zone. That's the way I sort of see it as well. There's those green decisions. That's the easy stuff. We do it in our heads. We do it without thinking. The next level up, that's much more difficult. And if you can learn how to use those cloud structures, one of the reasons that it's often called an evaporating cloud is because as soon as you get it written down, the problem solves itself. When you get fluent at writing them down, you will start to be able to do them in your heads, and you'll be in a group of people and you'll come up with the solution because you've drawn the cloud in your head, and they will think you are a genius. And that is how Clarke says you raise yourself, your level of cleverness, without necessarily raising your IQ. The red problems, they need another level of assumption raising and things, and I'll be showing you how to do that next week. That's also something you can practice, and eventually you'll be able to do that sort of thing in your head. You'll see the assumptions that are holding people back. You'll be able to just do them without writing things down, and that's when people start thinking you're a super genius. And it's just having a tool, having a system, I suppose, for dissecting problems.
Okay, I'd like to Graham, I just want to pick up on that, because I know you've just put a course together, and it's kind of in beta at the moment. There's been a few people that have gone through it, and one of the pieces of feedback I know you've already had, because I thought it was really cool, was, I've done so many of these now, I'm starting to see patterns showing up, and that's actually real live feedback from your course. So I'm sure at some stage Graham's going to let us know when that course is going to be freely available to people, but certainly check in on the webinar next week. Graham, maybe you can even maybe give us a glimpse of that next week.
Sure.
The week after that, I'm going to touch a little bit more on the psychology and how to use it on an individual level, but also when we talk about it at an organizational level, we want to be thinking about leadership as well. And these kind of tools, these thinking tools, really powerful for leadership, and in particular, as you can imagine, leading innovation. And I think leading innovation is probably a really nice way to come back to Churchill and go, and that's what it's about in terms of leadership. Hey, Graham, you mentioned that we're almost out of time. We are actually out of time, but look, what I'm going to suggest is we stick around for a little while, and we're quite happy to answer some more questions in the chat. So let's do that. But can I ask, if you need to go, please do go. But otherwise, it would be really great if you could just tell us in the chat what's one highlight or learning that you got from this webinar, because that'll really help us to kind of polish the work that we do. Where this is a relatively new, we're coming together. Clarke mentioned we only started really working together in March, although we've known each other for years. So that'll really help us. So in the chat, please let us know what are some of the highlights or one thing you might have learned in this particular session. And if there are other questions, obviously, look, they're coming through now. Brilliant name of Bob, best of both worlds. The Churchill example was really enlightening. That's great. Learning, evaporating clouds, objective is to achieve the best of both worlds. Nice. Yep. BOB. Yeah, I've seen this technique before, but today has really made it come to life, where I think I can explore it and use it to facilitate conversations in my work. Awesome, Clarke.
That's pretty cool.
Well done.
Well done.
Very
I see
nice
there's There's a question from John about, I mentioned assumptions earlier, which Bill Detmer mentions in his book. Yeah, there are a couple of sort of assumptions we use in the thinking processes. One is the assumptions when we're doing causal thinking. If this and that, then we get the outcome. What this is doing, the assumptions we're talking about here are the underlying assumptions. For instance, with the Churchill one, the assumption originally I had was the problem with oil was to do with the supply, as in the physically getting it from the Arab countries, from Persia to England. In actual fact, it was control of the supply. So if you didn't explore the assumption, then you would never have got to that conclusion. And also there must be some assumptions in there that coal-powered ships can never be powerful enough, that we haven't got enough room in the engine room to run two systems. We can't turn coal into a liquid-based fuel. You know, all these sort of things going on in the background. So that's the sort of assumption raising I'm talking about. That's
really cool. Actually, that's the difference between you and I. I tend to stop at this. You've got the, I know with my Rolling Rocks Downhill book, people said you never raised assumptions. You never mention them. And I sort of teach in the book how to do the cloud. And then that's where Bob first appeared 6, 7, 8 years ago. But I never use the assumptions because most of the time I don't need to. Well, actually, it's not that I never, but sometimes when you get stuck, you go there, and that's where the real magic happens from. So best of both worlds is brilliant. Yeah. But that's just one of the techniques. So I'm really looking forward to next week. This is the lovely thing we keep learning. Could we read through the responses here? Because I realise they're all coming.
I was just going to do that because there's a lot coming through, but I just pick up on, and Nell said, nice session with great insights. Curiously, waiting for the next one.
Oh.
Nice. Helpful. The idea of turning the cloud 90 degrees and the similitude of holding on the shoulders of Bob. Thanks, Clarke. Great webinar. My biggest takeaway today, finally, I can label what kind of problem solving that I've been using instinctively for years.
Yep.
Absolutely. And start to get tools to use it more methodically and conscious. Good point on the assumptions, as I had the route as the main issue and not the supply. Yep, nice. I'm falling in love with the Bob idea.
Good.
Fantastic. What else have we got? Missed the middle of the session, but impressed with the forensic problem breakdown process and use of synergy. I think this is the easiest way you can teach and explain evaporating cloud. Great work, Clarke. The shift from left to right, to bottom to top, coupled with Bob, is so much more intuitive. Hands and shoulders are useful metaphors. I completely agree with that. I think the metaphor, I've always put clouds on their sides, and I still do. It's a habit now. I'm sure I can overcome that habit if I tried, but I really like the idea of turning it up on its side. I tried evaporating cloud, but it was quite difficult for me. I see Bob approach can be easy to practice. It's a really great way to start getting familiar with just how powerful this tool is. But as Graham has mentioned, practice makes perfect, and the idea is to build proficiency. And I'm sure that in the next session, Graham will actually talk about that. Have I missed anything, guys? I think we've kind of managed to connect with anybody. A couple more new messages.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Actually, that feedback is really just useful. You have no idea how hard it is trying to stand on the shoulders of one of your heroes and simplify it.
There's a couple in the question and answers.
Yep.
First one is, why are TOC and these thinking tools not so popular? That's a question that the whole TOC community is battling with. This stuff seems so intuitive to me. It seems so logical. It makes sense. I don't understand why more people don't use it. So the short answer there is I don't know. Carl, how would you introduce evaporating clouds into an organization?
Oh, well, that's a really big question. And we actually, we touched on that in the webinar that we did last week, which was also available for people if they want to have a look at it. In that webinar, I actually asked, what are some of the obstacles to helping people problem solve? And there were quite a lot of them. So it takes a bit of a strategic approach to doing it. The starting point, obviously, is to start using them yourselves and get proficiency. But doing it organizational-wide takes a little bit more strategy. Shifting an organization is a complex problem, but it's actually quite inherently simple when it boils down to some of the basic things. We just need to take some time to be able to do that. I love Steve Tendon's comment here, standing on the shoulders of Bob.
I like that.
I think that's gold.
And Steve, you'll be pleased to know, Steve, by the way, is for people who don't know him, has written some fabulous stuff on TameFlow, which takes TOC stuff, applies it with what's it called, pattern thinking in Kanban, throughput accounting. So it's pretty nice of you to stay there. But you asked the other day, Steve, where was the cork in the bottleneck thing? And I've actually changed the cover of my book now, which will get profession done later, to include a cork, because that is the bit that we're trying to solve. That's the bit that's blocking us, is the cork, and that's why we use the thinking. So pop it out and everything flows.
Awesome. So people are starting to leave, which is cool. Said, sorry, Clarke, Carl and Graham, need to leave. Great first session. Really enjoyed getting to know Bob. Hope to see the next session. Yep, we hope to see you too. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure Clarke and Graham have as well, judging by the smiles on their faces. We just have fun with this. We've been kind of connecting every week and talking about stuff, and so it's really, really good to share. And hope you can come along to the next one. Do you want to hang out a little bit longer, guys, and just keep going through these chats? Obviously, if you have to leave, please do. If you've got other things to get to, if you have to, for example, go and open a bottle of wine that has a cork in it. Interesting, New Zealand now has screw top bottles on their wine. That's the predominant thing. So now when we're using corkscrews, we're only going to do it on particularly good bottles.
Or foreign ones.
Or foreign ones. Yeah, we do work internationally.
There is a company that makes corks that in France that had this dilemma, had this cloud, right? Do we stick, we're French, do we stick with corks, or do we switch to screw caps? And the advantage of screw caps is it increased their quality enormously. What they discovered.
The screw caps?
Yeah, so the screw cap
increases the quality.
So they had this choice between the two. But a lot of people wouldn't buy, especially if they were Italian. I just saw the comment there, Sarah. They wouldn't buy because the cork was an indication of tradition, and it was part of the pop sound and all of that kind of stuff, the ceremony. So like the cork was part of the experience. So what they did rather cleverly is that they actually did both. They sold the same wine with corkscrews, with corks, and with the screw caps. So they did both. They've got the best of both worlds. All their customers are happy, and it was very clever.
I'm not going to get baited, Robert. Carl, do you get your good wine from Australia? Well, I'm obviously not going to be able to answer that question. But there is plenty of good Chardonnay with screw tops in New Zealand, I can tell you that.
I didn't know they made wine in Australia. That's interesting.
Okay, so I'm starting to sense that the theme of the conversation in the chat is now getting far more relaxed, which is great. And what do you think, guys? Are we happy to keep going?
Why don't we say thank you to everyone for turning up? Tune in next week. We'll send out a link to this recording, and if you want to share it with anyone, feel free. our mission is to get this stuff out there because it's too good to not be out there. So feel free to share it. We'll pop some links into the last 2 sessions that we did. They were our practice ones. They're really, really interesting. I learned a lot from yours, Carl. I think you might have learned something from mine. And so we'll email that out. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. And if you can't turn up live, that's okay. You'll have a recording. And it's lovely to see. Thank you, Seb. It's lovely to see you there. And thank you, Robert. Yeah. So as you all click the leave button, we will wrap up shortly. Thank you. You guys got anything you want to say?
No, just thanks very much. Really good. I had a really good time.
Yeah, certainly I can see that cloud with the screw top versus cork. And friend of mine's a winemaker here in New Zealand, and he was one of the first to go to screw tops. And I remember him saying that the quality of the corks meant that on average, 1 bottle in every dozen was corked. The quality was down. And so it was a real problem because they got replaced for free and it was just a nightmare. And the problem he had to overcome was that traditionally the screw cap is the cheap stuff. But we got past that and the quality issues disappeared. So it's a perception that it's better, but in actual fact, the quality is better with a screw cap. It's more guaranteed.
I think we should go and do some research. I think we should get.
It's 10:45.
We should get one with a cork in it and one without.
Yeah, and there were those plastic corks too. They were awful things. They were the worst of both worlds.
Worst of both, indeed. There we go. Worst of both worlds.
And often that's what you end up with if you don't go through this process, a compromise. And the plastic corks, they didn't have the romance of a real cork, and you still needed a damn corkscrew to get the thing out.
Right, Anna in Ireland, go have some wine.
Yeah, she's off having wine now.
Yep, yeah. That's very good. Anna, it's lovely to see you in
Let
Ireland.
us know whether it's Australian or New Zealand.
All right, I am going to rather ruthlessly track down the
leave button
and say thank you everyone for tuning up. That's really good. We'll see you next week. Yeah, be good. Go to a nice glass of wine maybe. Bye-bye.